All right, here we go. Welcome everybody to our very first session. My name is Blessie, and I am co-moderating this wonderful session about sexual harassment with Dinasha. She is a primetime radio host on Kiss FM. And we're so excited to be able to connect with each of you, our wonderful panel speakers, to bring light to something that has recently been a huge issue that has popped up. And as much as this is based on experiences by women in media, which is why our group, Women in Media, thought that we would create a platform to talk about this even further. This is for all women. So I just kind of want to put that out there as well. Just a quick introduction about what Women in Media is and what we do over here. I'm broadcasting from the Vinyl Cafe, which is our headquarters. So thank you to them for providing this space. But essentially, we are not the very first Women in Media organization or group to to be there in Colombo, in Sri Lanka. Ideally, what we want to do is create a support network and a group where women who work in the media industry, which is ever growing, from web design, graphics, advertising, performing arts, to radio, TV, newspapers, journalists, to have a place where women can network, where we can be a group that comes together, that supports each other, that doesn't see each other as competition, but a place where we can find support, especially in situations like this. It's a great time for us to come, to learn, to find jobs. So that's essentially what Women in Media is, and in the long term, what we want to do. So without further ado, let's get this show on the road. We're going to be talking about sexual harassment, the first steps, what you do, what is harassment in the workplace, and Dinasha is going to introduce our wonderful panel of speakers.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to join us. So this is going to be our first discussion in hopefully a series of discussions about a very vast subject. And we've called it sexual harassment, or we're talking about harassment. And as women in the media, we've got an opportunity to, really address the issues that women in our field and also all companies in Sri Lanka are facing. So as women in the media, we felt it was our responsibility to take these first steps and, hopefully help all of you listening in with what these first steps really are. So to do that, we've got a fantastic panel of experts. And let me just introduce all of you to our audience. So hopefully we can start breaking everything down and then break the cycle as well. So first up, we've got Miriam Vadud. Right, she's an attorney at law. She's a legal and program manager for Women in Need Sri Lanka. Welcome, Miriam. Miriam, we can't hear you.
Okay.
There you go. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, and we've got Deshika Rodrigo as well. Hi, Deshika, welcome. She is the executive coach. She's an executive coach, HR executive, and female empowerment motivational speaker. We've also got Dharini Priscilla. Hi, Dharini. She is program manager at the Grassrooted Trust. We've also got Fiona Nanayakkara. She's an author. She's the author of Bully & Co. and also the founder of News Publisher Online. And then last but certainly not least, we've got the only gentleman on the panel, Mr. Ashantha Gunawardena. Welcome, Ashantha. He is an attorney at law, LL.B. Honors, London.
Okay, so once again, welcome everybody. It's so great that you guys are making the time, and good evening to everybody that's tuned in as well. Thank you to Vijay Newspapers and Pulse for making sure that it gets out to listeners all over the place. Men or women, I think it's something to realize that we all may at some point in our lives encounter harassment. It's not just women. However, more often than not, it's important to also know the fact that it is going to be a woman that finds herself in a position of harassment. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. What is harassment? What constitutes as harassment? I don't think it's plain and simple. So let's begin. And I will direct this to you, Fiona. You've been in a position where you can most certainly explain in your terms, what harassment is.
Okay. So my forte is mental harassment, right? So I will not touch upon sexual and physical harassment, and I think Mariam will take that over. In terms of harassment, right? Harassment is if a person is made to feel uncomfortable, right? So whether it's a text message or whether it's upfront bullying or whether it's talking behind your back, all that includes as harassment. So how you feel harassed is, one, you feel like your productivity levels drop, right? Like, you feel like the target feels like their productivity level drops, and then they go on to feeling anxiety. They wake up in the morning and they don't want to go to work, right? They feel excluded from their team members. They are basically ganged up on at work and they just don't want to be there. Their self-esteem is impacted, right? So when that happens, it becomes harder for them to perform, and then it becomes easier for the bully to show the top management this is a bad performer, instead of pointing out the fact that he's a bully, he or she. And then you develop this defense attitude, right? So when you're in this defensive attitude, you can't fight back or you can't perform. Again, if you're holding up a shield, it's harder for you to attack, right? So in terms of mental harassment, that's what a victim or a target would feel when they are being harassed. Okay. And I think someone can explain what sexual or physical harassment and the legal version of it as well.
Yeah.
So I think, Dharini, you can just briefly tell us what sexual harassment entails.
Briefly telling that, to put it very briefly, sexual harassment can be described as unwanted or unwelcome behavior of a sexual nature. Like Fiona was talking about, it's behavior that makes someone uncomfortable. It could also be behavior that you find intimidating or threatening or violating you in any way. I think the key word for us to unpack there is unwanted, because we have a culture of saying she asked for it, they asked for it. Nobody asks for harassment, right? The whole point of unwanted is that it's not wanted. And in order to understand harassment, it's very important for us to understand consent. But that's the problem here. We don't talk a lot about consent or personal boundaries or personal space.
Right.
So that's number one. And number two is that sexual harassment exists on a spectrum, meaning that there is no one such behavior that can be described as sexual harassment. It can be a range of things. It could be something as a missed call, or someone just sending you missed calls, making missed calls, sending you pictures, texts that you don't want. Or it could be someone physically assaulting you, harassing you, touching you, grabbing you in public transport or in your workplace. It could be any of those things. So we can't really say this is what harassment is and this is not. Mm-hmm. And the key way of identifying whether something is harassment or not is to focus on the victim. Because there's also a tendency to say when something happens, no, I didn't mean it that way. That was a joke. It wasn't harassment. That's not what I intended. It's never determined by the perpetrator. Whether the person was harassed or not is determined by the victim. It's dependent on the way the victim feels, whether they felt threatened, whether they felt intimidated or, assaulted. And the other thing is that sexual harassment has a lot of layers. It's not always a physical or an overtly sexual act. It could happen through the cyber platforms. It could happen emotionally. It could be a non-verbal gesture. So it's important to understand that it's not just one thing, that it's a spectrum, it has layers, and everyone's experience is different. So I hope we can, talk about that a little bit more as we move on.
Yeah, because I mean, I was just, thinking in a general workplace, where people, sometimes even personalities, people think that they're being friendly. So you may have either a guy or a gal saying, hey, good morning, you smell good, you look good, and it's a consistent thing. Some people might love the attention, being like, oh, thank you, have a great day. And some people might be like, oh, why are you smelling me? Or what does it matter how I look to you? Is it a matter of perspective, or is there a very clear black and white situation where, okay, that was actually unnecessary in the workplace for you to comment on how I smell or what I'm wearing?
I think that very much depends on the person, like I said, the victim and their boundaries, right? For example, I might be okay with Deshika smelling my hair, but I might not be okay with Mariam doing it. But sorry, Mariam. But what happens in group situations is that people assume, okay, just because Deshika did it, it means I can do it too.
Right.
And we see that with little behaviors, like, you know, giving a hug on a birthday, or, you know, putting someone's hand on their shoulder, things like that.
Yeah.
And sometimes, even if I am okay with Deshika smelling my hair or hugging me, it doesn't not mean that I'm always open to doing that. Our consent and our personal boundaries change, right? It changes with people, and it also
Yeah.
changes with situations. So it's about having that conversation. It's I think I read somewhere that consent is not yes or no, it's a conversation, because it changes.
And I guess it all comes down to if you feel comfortable with that behavior or not, right? Because if you're not comfortable with it, then there's the problem.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Ashantha, could you give us a legal definition? Perhaps you and Miriam could tag team on this one.
Our law recognizes sexual harassment as a criminal offense, and the provisions are given under Section 345 of the Penal Code. Basically, what it says is any sort of assault or criminal force which sexually harasses a person, or the use of mere words or action which causes any sort of sexual annoyance or harassment, will amount to an offense under this section. This offense contains an imprisonment term of 5 years, which will also amount to a fine, and also at times compensation also will be allowed or given to the victims of the said. So when we take this section, the fact that mere words or actions will result in any sexual annoyance is sufficient for a person to lodge a complaint under Section 345 of the Penal Code.
Yeah, let me jump in there. So what has to be understood is that this is unwelcome sexual advances, and that can be by words spoken, by gestures. So it's your conduct basically, right? And the law does not provide for or does not ask for the intention of the perpetrator. The law only asks for or looks at what the victim felt when these acts were committed. Okay, so it is a very strict offense. And also we must understand that it is very difficult to find evidence. Most often when it comes to sexual harassment at the workplace, it's difficult for us to compile evidence or collect evidence. And this is why it is very important. I think we'll deal with evidence later on, but the law as it is, it's specific, and it doesn't require anyone to prove the intention of the perpetrator. So a gesture, a wink, right? Or if someone just, like you mentioned before, hi beautiful, you look gorgeous today, anything of that sort, if it causes you annoyance and sexual harassment, if you feel you have been sexually harassed, then that amounts to sexual harassment.
Yeah.
So what
Can I just ask?
Yes.
So that is in relation to sexual harassment, right? What about in relation to what Fiona deals with, and like bullying in the workplace or mental harassment? What does the law state for that type of harassment, and what can you do?
So there are basic. Ashantha, would you like to?
See, it's like this now. Dinasha, the problem with this is there is a practical issue. Like Mariam said, yes, you can. The issue is factory may be willing to take down a complaint of that nature. That issue is a practical problem which an individual might have to face. Despite we having all these penal sections and to safeguard the interests these women practically have to now, you ask when it comes to the mental component of things, just because a person is standing next to you, you can go and say, okay, I feel uncomfortable and I don't like this person standing next to me, right? That is a mental impact which you are facing and which you are going through, right? But the fact remains is this actually explainable to someone else, right? So the issue is, yes, you can go and lodge a complaint, but also there is an issue how you are going to prove these allegations, right? If you have text messages, as Mariam earlier said, we have to, just because merely you go and state all of these things does not mean that you can prove your case. And proving cases of this nature is a bit tough at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. So when you consider the mental element, right, a mental torture someone is facing, the fact remains is they need to gather evidence. They can't just, without any base, just go and say, you know what, because of this person, I'm suffering mental torture. I mean, that has no weight, irrespective of however you feel. So that issue there.
If there is verbal harassment and, bullying happening, degrading, defamation, stuff like that.
Yeah.
What kind of proof would you have to take to lodge a complaint?
What about witnesses?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like all this is, sorry, Ashantha, so all this requires some form of evidence. Okay, because I want to bring this up later on in the conversation, but sexual harassment is one of the easiest allegations you can make, and one of the most difficult violations to prove and disprove, right? So you can make the allegation, you can make the formal complaint, but there is the presumption of innocence is still intact, right? So which is why it is now victims come up with their story. It's all over social media, or they bring their story with the greatest difficulty, because it's a difficult subject for them to talk about, very difficult subject. And because there are different pressures that hold you down. One thing is your job, you want to secure your job, right? You don't want to be the talk of town, right? So different aspects, and then you say, okay, where is the evidence? So no one's going to believe me. So all that put together, sorry,
it's a he said most of the time.
So when that happens, you don't want to formally, you don't want to take that step to complain, but it is very important for, if you feel that you're being sexually harassed over and over again, for you to make a formal complaint to the police.
So that's perfect. That leads us to the next question. That's exactly what we want to know. The importance of speaking up, I think, is something that is one of the toughest things to do in a situation. Identifying is what we just dealt with. Now, what's the next step? That is speaking up with what you just said.
Okay, so I was going to say, from a employer perspective, you have a right. You have a right to safety in the workplace. You have a right to equality in the workplace. You have which is sort of tied in to your right to work. So if any of that is being compromised in any way, you have every right to speak up. Now, within I realize that there are lots of social and legal issues around this. And I think Mariam explained that very well. But the important thing here is that we have to raise it. Whether your company has a policy or not, even if you are feeling really bad about it, if you feel there'll be consequences, the worst consequence can be that you might lose your job. You might get there might be a fallback on you. You might get further harassed. People will look at you in a bad way. I've seen all of this as an HR professional. But if you don't speak up, you are doing yourself a disservice, and you're paving the way for other women to go through the same thing.
Yes.
I would like to add to.
Yeah, go ahead.
In terms of statistics, right? Globally, 75% of the 75% of the workforce have experiences or like witnessed it, right? but 90% of the time they don't report it, right? From a local perspective, right? This one of the saddest statistics which I found. 23% of the time, workplace harassment happens because society thinks it's normal, right? The society thinks it's normal. This is corporate politics, right? So that contributes to the problem. What makes it worse? 40% of the time, the target doesn't do anything about it, right?
Yeah.
So, and sad to say, 15% of the time, the HR response have made it worse for the employee, right? So, an HR people also have to keep an open mind and, be human resource oriented, not, I don't know how to say it. A lot of the HR people that we know, they are not really human friendly. They are just more process oriented because that is what they are trained for. When they climb up the HR ladder, first of all, they are dealing with the salary slips and leave and, a lot of administration work. So when they get to the top, they've forgotten the whole human aspect of it. And they are more like, oh, let's get these things done. And what about the KPI? What about performance,
Yeah.
And result of not reporting, right? 40% of the results of reporting, actually, 41% of the time, the target is forced to leave, right? I've heard this happen in sexual harassment cases where, they've just paid off and paid a compensation off so that they don't damage their top management's image, and then they go on. And so they leave. And 15% of the time, they change their working style, right? Which is really bad. Like, I mean, honestly, if I change my working style, I wouldn't have started up my own business today, right? Because I would have just gone on to, working like them, pleasing the boss and not really getting my things in order. I would have just played accordingly, and then I wouldn't be here today. So there's a lot of weight there that people don't realize by changing their working style. So if it really impacts your usual way of managing people, your ethics, your integrity in the workplace, then you really need to consider what's happening.
So recently, just yesterday, when the media minister, the spokesman for the government came out and said they're not going to do anything about the journalist that made that accusation. And they said it is because she hadn't put down a formal complaint,
right?
And so they don't want to get involved because it would seem like the government's getting involved with the media organization. So from an HR perspective, Deshika, if something's happening to a woman that she feels uncomfortable with in the workplace, what are the first steps she needs to take through the company?
Great question, Dinasha. And honestly, it's true. If the woman doesn't complain, then it doesn't go beyond that. So that's the first step. But like Mariam was explaining earlier, the stronger your case, the better it is for you. So if, say, you are being harassed, and I'm not only talking about sexual harassment here, I'm talking about verbal harassment, intimidation, visual harassment, there's a whole mental harassment, there's a whole spectrum of harassment here. You need to, first and foremost, you need to tell the person that it made you uncomfortable. Today, while waiting for this meeting, I was watching the Dominic Strauss-Kahn documentary on Netflix. And so the easiest thing for a perpetrator to say is that you or whoever the victim is welcomed it. Yeah. So the first thing you have to do as a person who is being harassed in any form is to raise it with the perpetrator and say, look, what you're doing, even it could have been just something really mild, like a wink or something, but it makes me uncomfortable. Then you need to ideally record it, send an email, tell people about it, escalate it. I'm not sure I agree with Fiona that all HR people are turn a blind eye to these things. I hope not, if that's the case. But they really should not.
Actually, no, but what I'm saying is not all HR people, right? Obviously not all HR people, otherwise you wouldn't be here today. But even when I was trying to think about this problem, right, I know so many people who have done so many HR projects, engagement, recruitment, all that. But when I went to think of, someone who actually specializes in this area in HR, I could only think of you, right?
Thank you.
Right.
But you know, they should really take it very
Yeah.
seriously. But you know, I see where you're coming from, Fiona. I mean,
Yeah.
I have so many stories to share, and I
Yeah.
asked Blessie whether I can share. I mean, there's this one company I was working with where a newly hired HR head, hired from a very big multinational conglomerate in Sri Lanka. Within 3 weeks of coming on board, he started harassing the young receptionist. She was like 21 years old. He started hounding her, waiting for her outside the office, sending her all kinds of text messages, an older married man. And she raised it with with someone else in the HR team, who raised it to the group HR head. And so I was brought in, and you are not going to believe what I was told. I was told, you know, it's true, this guy has been sending some SMSs and all. But in Sinhalese, he says, "Hey, girl, Deshika, yeah, balana vidya harine." I'm like, balana vidya? So to translate this, they are saying that it was okay for this young girl to be harassed because something in her look was provocative, or, you know,
She was asking for it.
Asking for it. There you go.
Wow.
So this is coming from the group HR person. Luckily, the managing director of the company had a completely different view, and you know, this guy was fired. But so as a female, to get back to your point, Dinasha, you have to record things. You have to escalate. If the perpetrator is your boss, then where do you go? You go to your boss's boss. If that's also not possible, go to the board. Write to anyone at the top. I'm telling you, you will get some action, because this is a serious thing. You know, for a company's reputation, it's a horrible thing. They will try to shush it up probably, but a good company will actually investigate and do what is necessary. And like Ashantha said, you know, the law protects us against sexual harassment. It's up to 5 years of imprisonment, or you might get compensated. And so there's various things to protect us. You have to take action. And, you know, ladies, those of you who are listening, I really have to say, if you don't, as I said before also, you're really doing everybody a disservice. We really have to break this kind of taboo that surrounds harassment. That's why I think, Blessie, this is a fantastic thing you're doing.
Yeah, but that leads us to the next point. You know, beyond HR, if you feel that the company isn't making this easier to lodge a complaint, they're giving you the runaround, they're dragging it out, at what point do you bring legal into play?
Before you get to that, can I add a little bit, Blessie, on, you know, even before, usually before a target reaches the point of reporting to HR, what happens is, you know, they are demoralized not to work, and then, you know, the bully convinces the rest of the team, or, you know, the company, that is a bad performer, you know, like the story that Deshika, you know, explained to us. So usually it's a performance issue, so that, you know, you can't really say, I didn't do anything wrong, right? So a few things that I suggested to my targets, it's very basic things, right? Like very basic things, but things that you can do, right? One, analyze the situation completely, because sometimes the target also thinks just because the boss is blunt or quite upfront and maybe loud, they think they're being bullied, right? I had a French boss who was like quite blunt, but then I knew he meant for the best. And, you know, he lacked a bit of people skills, but he wasn't really bullying. He was just blunt and loud, right? So if you really analyze the situation, you kind of understand where this person's coming from, if he or she is a bully, or if I am overreacting, right? So before you actually say, oh, I'm being harassed, like understand if this person means for the best. If that person saying, hey, you're not doing these things, really analyze, is this for my betterment? Do I really need to fix this part of myself as well?
Right.
Then document, right? Documenting goes a long way, and most people don't understand the importance of it. But I've worked with employees who have gone to their boss and actually just said that they're documenting the whole situation of what's happening, and then bullying stop, because they're worried that,
it's
someone's
become a
recording.
thing.
Yeah. So sometimes you don't even have to present this document, but at least you, during this documentation process, also you realize if you have been harassed or not, because you further analyze what happened, what was the situation, is this person telling the truth or not, or is it just bullying, right? And learn about the company policies. From each company to company it might differ. So in majority of the companies that I have worked for, I could not run to the police. I had to take the necessary steps involved in the company. So sometimes it's HR, your immediate supervisor, then your CEO and your group, and then you have another whistleblowing system also. And after you take all those 5 steps, is the only way out for me to go and get legal help, right? So you have to really learn what are the policies in place for you. And also, if you're in probation, you have no power. So, you really need to learn and understand the situation that you are in. Right?
Yeah. Okay.
Motivating yourself, because most of the time when a target is completely demoralized and demotivated, so you have to pick yourself up, wake up in the morning and say, okay, this bully is not going to control my day, right? The reason why it impacts the workplace bullying is so effective is because majority of the time it's your boss, that's the person that you're waiting for feedback from or approval or praise from, and this person bullies you every single day, right? So the fact that it happens daily is what gets to a person, and then they become underperforming employee. So reminder to motivate yourself and understand your strengths and then move on. And also the rest of it, right? Like detach yourself from the bully so that you could see the situation as a third I mean, not actually discuss this, right? If you can discuss it to a trustworthy person, you can get another opinion on it, right? Understand if situation is real or not, right? Even when I was being harassed, honestly, I it was just a bunch of funny stories, right? I had no intention of writing a book, right? I had these funny stories and I thought it was funny. And then my friends thought, oh my God, these stories are funny because this is not normal, right? And then I can't believe go through this. So like, you should blog about it, right? And then so I was like, yeah, it's good content, but then blogging about a problem isn't going to help anyone. And then when I had these tools in place to help these targets is when I finally wrote a book, because these are tools that has worked for the targets that I've helped out, right? Then final step is to decide. Final step is deciding whether you're going to report it or not, right? In majority of when it comes to a practical sense, sometimes they're not in a position to report. Even I've advised, like especially when you're in probation, right? You have no power. They've just joined the company, so you've got to hang on there, or you have to leave. Or if it's getting really uncomfortable, you leave. And then there are single mothers who are depending on their salary, so they can't just take off and leave just like that, and then their career. So deciding to report has to happen. It is a huge decision.
It's a huge decision for sure.
At one point I want to report a guy, and he got really, really lucky, because that within hours my department was changed. I don't know how that happened. He had some lucky star, right? Because if I reported him, and I was thinking as a target, I'm thinking, oh my God, his wife doesn't have a job and he has 2 kids, I'm thinking on behalf of
him. Yeah. Right. How about that?
So yeah, here this guy is bullying me every day, but here I am thinking, if I report,
Yeah.
So do make that decision very consciously. Speak to trustworthy people, but do not talk about it in a gossipy way, right? Do not gossip around the office, because the story can turn back against you, and then it's going to be a different inquiry altogether.
Right. So assessing the situation is something that is important. Deshika, did you want to add something to that?
Yes, I did. I agree with what you're saying, Fiona, but I think the fact is, even if you were wrong, like your perception, if someone did something and you kind of misread the signs, if it made you uncomfortable, you have a right to escalate it.
True.
Whether your perception was right or wrong. Like Dharini said earlier, you know, what A might do to you and B might be
No,
different.
not like that, Deshika. Like now, for example, even I've had a boss, right, who was quite like blunt, right? But when I really analyzed of what this person is saying, it is actually for my betterment, right? You know, I was actually getting loaded with work as a head of the department, and you know, he was guarding me to delegate. Honestly, I'm glad that I've learned how to delegate, even through all his blasting, because you know, it took me a long way. So sometimes you might a target who's actually been victimized by a bunch of other top management might think this other person is also bullying me given that situation. But if you isolate the situation and analyze it, you can see, okay, this guy is actually telling this for my own good. That's what I meant.
Yeah, understood. And also, I wanted to add, whether you're on probation or not, again, correct me if I'm wrong, Mayam and Ashantha, you have every right to escalate things. Just because you're not confirmed as a permanent employee doesn't mean people can treat you any old way. I don't think that's right. Correct me if I'm wrong, lawyers.
Yes, you're correct, Deshika, because it's a criminal offense. Sexual harassment is a criminal offense, and nothing else matters. If you have been, if it has been perpetrated, you have every right to escalate it to the high authorities or even to go to the police.
That is for sexual. What about mental?
Yeah, for sexual harassment. Yes, for sexual harassment.
What about physical harassment? Does that come under that?
It is mental harassment.
Sorry?
You said physical, or do you mean mental harassment?
Because
physical harassment would be
psychological.
Give me an example, Fiona.
Verbal harassment.
Yeah, psychologically making you feel. Yeah.
Okay.
So I would think that if you are in a situation where you cannot work, that is actually impeding your ability to be a productive employee, then you have to file for what is called constructive termination, and I will leave the lawyers to explain that a little bit more.
Mariam, Ashantha, did you want to kind of step in there to talk about, like, for example, once you've tried the HR route and potentially it didn't turn out to be very helpful at all, because more often than not, I mean, I have experience only in media, but sometimes they can give you the runaround to dissuade you from, even once you've plucked up the courage, you've done all of the things and you've made it to the HR department, knowing that, you know, either you're going to blow the lid off this place or, it might just get dismissed, because quite similarly, it was like, maybe they think you were just asking for it or whatever nonsense. At what point do you bring legal in? Do you notify someone right, kind of at the get-go of what's going on? And then, how does that work? When's a good time to bring in legal?
So I would say, Blessie, Ashantha, you can correct me if I'm wrong. It depends on what course of action you want to take.
Right.
Because the moment you go to the police and you lodge a complaint, then it becomes a matter for them to look into. They will investigate, and it becomes a criminal matter where they will file action in court on your behalf. Okay, so if you want that route, you have a right to complain to the police and have this recorded. But if you want to explore the internal procedure and protocols within your company, and on exhaustion of it, where there is no action taken, you want to then go to the police, you have that option as well. Because it is advisable that you take immediate action within the company, because that is something that the court will ask. What is the action you took?
Yeah. Right.
Which is why it is very important, like Deshika mentioned, for you to escalate this to your immediate boss, to their bosses or whoever, and have it recorded somewhere that you have taken this step, you have complained because of this conduct by X person. Right?
Yeah.
But then we have to also mention now, this is where there is a company or there is a framework. But there are also types of employment where there is no company. Right? For example, actors. Their contract is with this one person. And So they don't have an internal protocol or internal system to protect their rights. So that is when they have to go direct to the police, because there is no one else they can complain to.
Right.
Right. So that is one route that they have and they should take. Whereas in a company, it has to made mandatory that everyone has a sexual harassment policy. We didn't go through that, Blessie, but I think we should, through passage of legislation, make it compulsory for every company at registration to have this sexual harassment policy and systems in place, committees that will deal with this.
Yeah.
So that has to be advocated and pushed for. And so once you are faced with this sexual harassment, because sexual harassment at the workplace is a violation of your right to work, right? And it's telling you to work in this space with another person in a respectful manner. That is all you're asking. Treat the other person with respect, irrespective of age, sex, seniority, gender, experience. Nothing matters. And as Deshika mentioned, it is very important that you inform the perpetrator that you do not condone this conduct.
Yeah.
And you do not appreciate that conduct. It is very important because it is a continued, because see, when in a workplace, it is very natural for someone to maybe, crack a joke, right? But then there is a limit. You have to draw a line. If I feel I'm being sexually targeted and I'm not comfortable with his conduct repeatedly, I should make it clear to him, look, I don't agree with this. I will not put up with it. And any more of this, I will escalate it to HR.
Right.
So what that has to be made clear, and then you can't get the blame of, no, but you invited me. Right? And also it has to, whenever you bring it up with HR, try to get it recorded, on record, somewhere written down that this complaint was made, because that is going to be your evidence in court.
And just to ask a question, when you do confront the person that's making you feel uncomfortable, should that be on record as well? Ideally? Yeah.
Not maybe if you are escalating it, if it still continues and then you're escalating it to HR, you say, look, on this day, I told him that I told her that I am not for this kind of conduct. It makes me uncomfortable. So that can be placed on record when you do report to HR.
And then Ashantha, if you could just tell us, so once you do go to the cops and you place your, you make your complaint, if you can just run us through what the process is from the granting of the bail and up until the trial and the protection of your witness, up until then.
Yeah. I have a question, Mariam. I'm sorry to interrupt. Because this is for my knowledge as well. If you're on probation, right? I don't want to go around giving the wrong advice to people, right? If you're on probation and if you're being mentally harassed, can you go to the cops?
Yes.
Okay.
Simple, yes, because there is absolutely no bar in any corporation which prevents you from your fundamental rights of going and lodging a complaint.
Okay.
Right? Even if there's a structure on reporting harassment in companies, it does not necessarily mean that it's a bar for you to go to the police station and lodge a complaint in respect of the harassment which you're facing. So whether you are on probation or permanently employed or whatever, it does not act as a bar for you to go and lodge a complaint.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So
what happens is sometimes, when they're on probation and then they go and lodge a complaint and then, you don't need a reason to get rid of that person. So then they get fired, right?
Yeah.
Right. So they lose the job. So it.
But that doesn't interfere with your right, Fiona. You have a right to go and complain.
Yeah.
Irrespective of the repercussions of it.
Yeah.
And also, in respect of the repercussions, also there are safeguards, right? Which I think Mariama and I would be discussing later on in this conversation. So it does not necessarily mean that you can be influenced or interfered with. You do have certain rights.
Yeah, yeah, of course, of course. Okay, sorry, go on. Sorry.
So, Dinasha,
You
getting back to your question, right? So, once you go and lodge a complaint, officers of this nature, right? Despite, I think Mariam said, an investigation would be carried out by the police and then necessary steps would be taken. But however, just to carry forward on that point, once a complaint is 345, the person can be arrested without a warrant. So in most cases, in a practical aspect of things, the police does not conduct an investigation. What they do is, at that point of time, they will ask this perpetrator to come in for inquiry to the police station, and subsequently he would be arrested and thereafter produced to court. Because offences of this nature, a police bail cannot be granted. And also at the same time, what a person needs to be mindful of is the fact that at certain situations, we have gone through this, what the police try to do is they want to settle this at the police station, basically warning this said person, not to do this again, right, and that whole process. But what you need to keep in mind is, as per the law, offences of this nature cannot be settled. It has to be reported to court, and after that, the court can decide whether to convict the person or acquit the person depending on the evidence. So what one must be mindful of is, at certain times, the police also will ask the people just to settle so that it makes their life easy as well. Right? But what you need to keep in mind is, you all can always insist the police to report this to court, arrest the person and produce him before court. Once the suspect is produced before court, a bail would be granted, because as per our law, granting of bail is the norm, refusing bail is the exception, right? And just because a person is granted bail does not mean that your case is weak. Right. It just means that he has his rights and he is presumed to be innocent until proven guilty. Right. So, therefore, just because at certain times we've always heard people, I lodged a complaint, see, nothing happened, he just went and he was just released from court. This is the normal thing which you hear, right? But the fact remains is, as much as you complain, the said perpetrator also does have his rights, and our law safeguards his rights as well until a proper hearing or trial has been conducted, and then the court will decide whether he is guilty or innocent. So one of the two. So at the same time, now what could happen is, once a person is released on bail, right, they might try to interfere with you back again, maybe make certain requests through other people to rescind your complaint or to withdraw your case. So that kind of thing can happen. And that interference can be direct or indirect, because mostly they would want to influence you so that, they could get this matter resolved without having to pay for their actions. So at that point in time, what happens is, if you feel you are being interfered with or influenced in any nature, directly by the said suspect or in a roundabout manner, right? At that point of time, you still do have steps to safeguard your interest. So at that point of time, what a person could do is, basically, they can again go to the police station, which they initially lodged the complaint, and report of this certain influence which is being made. Right? So once they report this incident, or if, let's say, someone, let's say a friend of the said suspect or perpetrator, keeps on calling you and saying, withdraw this complaint, he doesn't want to do this anymore, and that kind of thing. And this becomes a nuisance to you, or you feel, you're being influenced, or you're being threatened in any way, right? As I said, go back to the police, lodge another complaint, right? And what will happen is, the police will report the new fact to court in respect of your case. Right. And at that point in time, the magistrate who allowed bail to the said suspect at inception has the right to cancel the bail until the said trial is over. So that way, our laws, this is under the Witness Protection Act. You can go and report facts. And as per that act, a magistrate has the power to cancel the bail order which he made and to remand the suspect until the end of trial. So that option is available. So there are checks and balances to safeguard the interests of people. Like earlier, what Fiona said, let's say you're on probation, you go and report on something of this nature, and immediately as a side effect, right, you're being sacked for no apparent reason, right? That again, you could go and file an action stating that they are trying to influence you. So those options are always available, and our law recognizes these rights so that the witnesses or the victims of these crimes are always protected. So those options are available.
It was
Just
very important to know all of that, because I didn't know it.
Yeah.
So thanks.
Just going back to something that Dinasha brought up earlier, which was recently in the paper about the mass media ministry, Kelly Rambukwella. He said, look, we're not going to pursue these investigations because an official complaint was not made with the police, even though there were statements made on social media. And then, interestingly enough, we had the State Minister of Women and Child Development, P.L. Ashantha de Silva. He came out and spoke to the Morning about, hey, you know, if they're not going to file a complaint with the police, you can file a complaint with us and we will conduct the investigation on your behalf. So I think there's a little bit of confusion in terms of like, okay, so if I'm working for the media, I don't complain to those guys, but then I can also complain to the Women and Children Ministry, and they will. And then do I go to the police? It was just so like confusing.
It was confusing.
So I haven't seen this statement, Blessie, of the minister.
Yeah, it was in the Morning. It was an interview that he did with the Morning.
He probably meant that a complaint can be made to NCW, NCW, National Committee on Women. They were established by the Women's Charter, and I don't know if they do take complaints, but I think ideally what you have to take out of it is that a complaint still has to be made.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Whoever it is going to take action. The official formal complaint has to come from the victim. Right. So this brings me to another point, Blessie. I mentioned before that sexual harassment or allegations of sexual harassment or the fact that it has happened, it is an easy allegation to make. Okay. And you can make it public. You make it public, say, this person sexually harassed me. But, and then he or she is branded as a sexual predator.
Right.
He is not given that. He can obviously come and he can deny it or he can stay quiet about it. But when you when you have named him as a sexual offender or a harasser, he is already branded as a predator.
Right.
Right. And this doesn't always go to court. Right, because you don't take that route. You don't make the official complaint. You don't want to take it to court, but you just put it out there.
Put it out there. Yeah.
Right. But what we have to remember is that our law, we have the presumption of innocence, and until the court of law proves you guilty, you are held to be innocent. Right. So that is why. So victims do say, and it is very difficult for a victim to find evidence. We have discussed this. It's very difficult, but that is why it is important to make your complaint to the authorities, to your HR, and you have to go through all the systems that are internally available, and then if that doesn't help, the formal legal system, make that complaint that will back you and your story, because you are the victim.
Yeah.
Right, and if you don't take steps to protect yourself and build your case, no one else is going to do it.
Absolutely.
So same with this issue that was brought up to the minister, and if the state minister says that if you don't make that formal complaint, nothing is going to happen, and it's just going to be just out there.
Just out there. Yeah.
And another thing I just want to say, Blessie, this was a discussion on Twitter Spaces, and it was also a journalist, and she said that at her workspace, someone referred to her as the girl in red lipstick, and she was quite offended by it. And for me at the time, it didn't make sense, because it's like me calling a guy, okay, the guy in a black shirt or the guy in the pink shirt, right? So how can that be sexually harassing? So it's not, I think, that one-time statement. It is the circumstances surrounding the whole thing that you have to take. You can't just take this one statement and say, I was sexually harassed. He referred to me as a girl in red lipstick. It doesn't work like that, right? There has to be surrounding circumstances which you show to court that these were the circumstances that this happened in.
Yeah.
He didn't just say red lipstick for no reason. He meant it. There was a sexual innuendo in it.
And I think that's something that Fiona raised as well, with assessing the situation, how important that is. But just going into the next phase of it, if you don't say anything, right? Dharini, could you just share with us what someone goes through on that level, of being harassed, staying silent, and just trying to let it go, to a point where we're ultimately desensitized, and then paving the way for this to become more of a cycle than anything else?
I think the impact of, being a victim of sexual harassment, it kind of is relatable regardless of whether you complain or don't complain. And even if it goes, if it works out for you or not, it's there. In terms of the impact and what, these victims go through, the first thing is, obviously, we talk a lot about the psychological impact, how it affects. It's not just like, oh, I feel scared, I feel helpless. Yes, those are the obvious ones. But it's also about, it alters how a person sees themselves, right? And that's not just the event or the nature of the sexual harassment itself, but also how other people respond to it. Whether you made a complaint about it, whether you talk to someone about it. Because one thing we have to understand is that sexual harassment is not necessarily something that happens from a man to a woman, but it's always something that happens from someone with power to someone without power. So the victim is already in a state of powerlessness, right? Because of their gender, because of their ethnicity, because of their work experience, socioeconomic class, whatever it is. Right. So what happens is, once they get harassed, or if they're getting harassed, they become more and more powerless. And that powerlessness can affect how they feel about themselves, not just in the workplace, but in other environments as well. And also, it has a very negative, impact on your self-esteem. It has an impact on your self-confidence. And then, of course, these factors, move into how you engage with your workplace, how you talk to your colleagues, how you talk to your superiors, how you just, view your workplace. Do you see it as a safe environment? Do you see it as a productive environment? Sometimes it comes to a point where, your safety needs become more important than your, physical needs. Like, okay, I need to, make money, I need a job, I need this, I need my financial security. But at one point it's like, no, I can't go through this, I deserve it, I need to be safe, I need to be respected, I need to be valued. So we've had many cases, we personally know, all of us here know women who have quit their job, who have left, to a different place because they couldn't deal with not just the harassment itself, but how it was being viewed by the perpetrator, by the colleagues, by the HR, whoever. And something that's interesting is that we know, okay, so when a woman quits or moves to a different branch, whatever, it has a financial impact on her. It has a career impact, for her. But it also affects the overall productivity of the organization. And that's something that a lot of organizations and employees don't understand. that sexual harassment not just impacts the person, but also the workplace culture, right? How it's not just about, oh, okay, so if this is a problem, we have to invest money on training, on policies, on this and that. It's not just that. It's how you see this place. If you don't think of your workplace as a safe space, that's a huge problem, because we spend most of our time in that place,
Right.
more than at home. We spend most of our time in our school or in our workplace, and therefore there is a need for that place to be a safe space. And just a couple of things that I wanted to touch on when we discussed before was that, number one, in terms of the impact, I think it's also important to talk about the impact on bystanders, because something interesting Fiona was talking about was sometimes, like I said, it's about consent, right? If you're okay with the behavior of the other person, that's not harassment. If somebody's shouting at me, if somebody's swearing at me, if somebody is all being, sexually flirtatious or whatever, if I'm okay with that, that's not harassment. So we always say, okay, this is not harassment. It's fine. I'm okay with this. But in a workplace environment, it's a little bit different, because it's not just the two of you. There are people around you. Okay. I think something that is important for us to talk about is how we often view the workplace as a physical environment, right? This is my office room, this is my building, this is my cubicle. But with our current reality, it's not, it's not a physical space. Some of us are working from home, some of us go in for a couple of days, and also most of us are working online. So it's important to understand that, even if it happens online, even if it happens during a Zoom meeting, it still constitutes as harassment and still can have an impact, right? We generally have a tendency to disregard cyber violence and cyberbullying as it's not a big deal. It's just block them, just don't talk to them, just, turn off your phone, get off Facebook. So that attitude can really have a negative impact, especially right now, because we don't have the luxury of turning off, getting off online. We need to be there. And also, in terms of the impact, I think it's important to understand the connection between your mental health at home and your mental health in the workplace. Because when we say we want to build a safe environment, a safe work environment, a respectful work environment, it does not mean, hey, be nice at work and go hit your wife at home. It's not that. You can't be nice and respectful at the workplace and then have a different personality at home, right? It's about building a personality that is respectful and, empathetic in every situation. And I think in terms of, how domestic violence or harassment in public transport, these things are very much connected to the workplace environment as well, and it's connected to harassment in the workplace as well. So even if you are not being harassed or made uncomfortable in your workplace, if you are facing harassment on your way to work, if you're facing harassment while you're working from home, that is still relevant to your workplace, right? Because that is associated with your workplace. And a lot of people don't realize that, because they think it's something that happens from my colleague while I'm in my office. It's not always that way. And the last thing that I wanted to kind of flag was something I think Mariam was talking about, the red lipstick, which I thought was very interesting. Because one thing about sexual harassment is, like we all were talking before, there's a tendency for us to normalize it. Like, for example, sexual harassment in public transport, the most common reaction is, or, when I say this happened, and they're like, oh yeah, that happened to me yesterday. And we've made it a joke. We've made it like a common occurrence. And I've noticed that transitioning to cyber violence as well. Oh yeah, this dude sent me a message too. We normalize it. And that's a very bad thing, because we think it's okay for other people to treat us that way.
Right.
And in terms of, so that creates a problem where when women or people are harassed, they don't realize they're being harassed.
Exactly.
They don't understand that what they're going through is wrong legally and morally and ethically. So two things that I've noticed, like I said, we work, Grassrooted works a lot with corporate environments on sexual harassment and anti-sexual harassment training. And two things that we kind of emphasize on is how to identify whether you're being harassed or not. And the first thing is obviously what we talked about, is that it's targeted. This person is not doing it randomly. You're a target. because of your gender, because of your experience, because of your ethnicity, whatever it is. You're being targeted because you've been identified as someone with less power, and therefore that powerlessness is being exploited. And
Dharini, let me jump in there. It doesn't have to always be of someone who has power that harasses you. It can be your colleague who's on the same level or even low who's harassing you, right? But just that it is difficult for you to take action when there is someone of power who harasses you.
yes,
That's the difference there. Yes.
Yeah, just to clarify, so in terms of power, obviously in a workplace, it's, we notice the supervisor or the senior harassing a junior, but power is not always organizational also. Like, for example, a woman can harass another woman. It could be based on their ethnicity. It could be based on their religion. It could be based on their sexual orientation. So because it's a bit of a social construct, it could happen. So for example, if I'm an intern, I could harass another person if I feel like I have more power than them in a socio-economic sense.
It's a superiority complex, one way or the other.
It is. It's abusing the kind of privilege that you have. And the other,
to the points that you were talking about, you said the 2 points, where society finds it normal or commonplace, the harassment in transport and stuff like that. Something else that I've noticed is in a lot of in the media organizations, they use humor as an excuse or a tool. Oh no, we're just joking.
Yeah.
We're just commenting on what she looks like. They use humor as a tool to degrade, to humiliate, to bully, to make fun. And when you do speak up and say, hey, that's not cool. Oh no, we were just joking. Take, like, why are you getting so uptight about it?
And they deflect to make you feel awkward, and then they use that to leave you out.
Exactly. And what Dharini was saying is then you in turn feel, oh, maybe, I'm overreacting. Maybe, that wasn't really that bad, when in fact it was really bad. But they make everybody around you and you feel like, oh, it was just a joke.
And it's interesting because this culture of mental, verbal bullying or mental harassment, we've been desensitized to it for a long time, like teachers bullying us or parents saying things.
Yes.
We've kind of been used to people who have more power or people close to us, like friends saying things about our appearance, things about the way we dress, our jobs, whatever, like things like calling your student an idiot, like gona, burua. Normalize. So when your boss says that, it doesn't sound like harassment because, oh, that's, they're just, motivating me. They're just trying to do that. So that's an issue. And in terms of the other 2 things was that what Mariam was talking about was very important. The fact that sometimes harassment, when it happens once, when a behavior happens once, it might not, feel like harassment. You might not think of it as harassment. But sometimes a behavior's exact same thing can become harassment when it's repetitive. So if somebody calls me girl with the lipstick, I might be okay with that. But if they keep referring to me as that all the time, I might feel uncomfortable. So people can't say, you were okay with it last month. What's wrong with you now? It's not that. It's boundaries change, feelings change. And also the other thing is that other than being repetitive, harassment is always intentional. So we have to think about why is that person saying that? Because if they're saying, oh, girl with red lipstick, girl in black sari, whatever, are you saying that as a compliment or is that a sexual innuendo? Because if it's a compliment, you're trying to make me feel better about myself. But if it's a harassment, you're trying to make me uncomfortable. So I don't think if the person is saying you're a girl in red lipstick, if you're saying that to make me uncomfortable and if it's, quoted in sexual innuendo, that's harassment. So that intention of, it's not just what they're saying, but very much about how they're saying and why they're saying it as well. So those are a couple of things that we need to kind of really understand in the workplace because it's not always black and white. It's not, this is harassment, this is not. Something that was not harassment before can turn into harassment over time. And I think what Deshika was talking about in situations like this, the most important thing is to point that out to that person, because the funniest and the most ridiculous thing is people don't realize that they are being violating or harassing or whatever. They think it's a joke, they think it's okay. So the first step for any victim of harassment would be to point that out and say, hey, you know what you did was not okay. You know, that made me uncomfortable, that made me feel violated, whatever. But unfortunately, this is a overall bigger issue we have in our society. We are not trained or made comfortable to say no to other people. We are a bunch of people pleasers who just not, and we are used to, especially women, right? You're expected to say yes, you're expected to be obedient and subservient. So we are not comfortable speaking up, even if it makes us uncomfortable, because we feel like we are causing a problem, or like, I don't want to be annoying. I get very sad when women start a dialogue with, I don't want to be a bother, but why do you think you're a bother? You're not being a bother just because you're talking about your feelings, or you're talking about your boundaries. So I think it's more in the workplace. It's, if we are talking about sexual harassment, it's also very important to talk about things like how we treat other people, just in general, sexually or not sexually.
Right.
And that's a overall, a long-term goal. But yeah, that's something we'll have to dissect with longer conversations.
Blessie, I'd just like to follow up from Dharini. All her points are very pertinent, very important. And this whole thing, women in need, we focus on women and girls.
Yeah.
And you see how culture, how religion, how traditions have molded a woman into something lesser than she is, right? Where she has to be subservient. She has to be, okay, your brother gets more, or you have to respect the males in the family. Whereas there's no problem with respect, but that respect is not a mutual respect. So it is how we bring up our children, and the education in schools. Education plays a huge role, and I think this is what Grassrooted also, Hans touches on very importantly, that it is important for children to be taught consent, how to work in a space together, respect. These are things that are not being taught. So it is only when you are taught that you know how that it is important. So what you see in an office, or in work environment where there are not abuses, but it becomes an environment, a bullying environment, because that is what they have seen and they've learned.
Right.
Sometimes you turn on certain radio channels in the morning, all you hear are these disparaging jokes about women, about wives, and you're thinking, how on earth is it funny? Right? But that is a constant thing. The WhatsApps we get, everything is about you're laughing at a woman or at a wife.
Right.
So that we have normalized it. We laugh at it.
Yeah.
Right? But now my daughter would say, that's not funny, mama. Right? So that is because you keep hearing, you keep telling them, look, you are equal. You are as important. Don't let anyone push you around. Okay, so that is what will trickle into your workplace. So it's the same thing now when Dharini spoke about the company and how women, the productivity, it affects productivity, bullying and harassment. So it's the same with the country. We are urging and advocating for policymakers to take that stand and say, we do not condone violence. We are against violence against women. But no one does that.
Right.
We are more than 50%. Women make more than 50% of the population. And the more you empower them, the more empowered the country is. But no one thinks of it that way, because the majority of them are misogynist. Right? So they don't want to see it in that light. So that is what again infiltrates into your company. So it is very important, and it's a very difficult topic for victims to talk about. It's very difficult for a victim to say, I went through this.
Yeah.
Even 10 years later, it is still difficult.
Yeah.
Right? But it is very important for everyone to know the law. First and foremost, I think it is very essential for you to know what your legal rights are. And this law is pretty clear. Sexual harassment at the workplace is pretty clear. So as long as you have your backup, you've taken all precautions. You've indicated to him or her that you do not accept this behavior or this conduct. You have taken it up with authorities. It is recorded. Then you take all those precautions, and then you have a very evident case there.
Blessie, I just wanted to add one last thing there.
Yeah.
Agreed. And that's the essence of this conversation, right?
Yeah.
As Mariam summarized. Just one last thought is that while we do that, encourage women and girls to say no, I think parallelly we need to encourage men to take no as an answer. It has to be equally there. It's not just about stand up for yourself. It's also about, hey, be nice to other people.
Right.
It has to go as a parallel conversation.
Yeah.
So it's about saying no and also taking no for an answer. And we need to do that at the same time. Otherwise, this is just going to be a one-sided conversation.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, so guys, I think we've covered all the first steps, the bases. I mean, you guys have really been able to break it down for us and give us the different interpretations of what harassment entails. And for me personally, finding out the legal framework from a corporate perspective and what the first steps are if you do find yourself in a position like that, I feel personally well equipped to deal with it in the future. So if for everyone who's listening and who's tuned in and taken the time to get some knowledge about the issue, we've got an amazing bunch of people here who can guide you through it. So Deshika Rodrigo, she is a corporate coach. She is an HR consultant, an expert. So she would be able to guide your corporation into into finding out how better to serve your staff, women and men. And then Miriam, of course, from Women in Need. Miriam, can you tell us what you guys do specifically and what you can offer?
Yes, Dinasha. So at Women in Need, we provide free counseling and legal services for victims of any form of violence, women and girls. And we also have 4 shelters, or shelter facilities, which are mostly for victims of domestic violence. Yeah. But if you do have a problem at your workplace, do give us a call. Our hotline is 07756765555. And drop us an email. We're active on Facebook, on Instagram. So do talk to us and our counselors who are quite experienced in dealing with all forms of harassment. And that could be the first step, one of the first steps that you can take. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So Miriam, Ashantha, thank you. Dharini from Grassrooted, thank you. Fiona, thank you. And of course, Blessie, thank you.
Thank you.
For putting it all together.
All right, awesome. Well, thanks again to everybody that's tuned in. I'd like to just also officially thank Vijay Newspapers once again and Pulse for streaming it live for us. Just reminding you that if you do have any questions with regards to any of the topics that we've discussed, Mariam from Women in Need, as well as Dharini from Grassrooted Trust, said that you can contact them directly on their social media pages. And also, if you have any questions about women in media and what we do, if you have any suggestions or comments, please direct it towards our email address, which is womeninmedialk@gmail.com. And we'd be happy to forward your questions, your queries to any of these wonderful folk so that we can get some answers back. But do remember that this is the first to a series that we're going to be talking about for women and men, of course, everywhere, not just in media, with regards to sexual harassment, HR policies, holding corporates and our workplaces accountable, and also how victims can find healing, the aftermath, what you can do, who to reach out to, so that regardless of if it's something that you've been through recently or currently going through, or something that you've been dealing with in the aftermath of a situation that happened maybe even 10 years ago that you haven't quite gotten over. I'm sure these stories, even these conversations, trigger emotions, feelings, and we don't want you to feel trapped in the situation that you are. So thank you again to our speakers for making the time. Dinasha, you've been a great co-moderator with me, and we'll catch up with you all again at the next session. Thanks and good night.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.